Some jackass attempted to destroy an in vitro fertilization clinic in Palm Springs, California, via a suicide bombing. Now, there's several variants of the groups out there, collectively known as anti-natalists. Root word natal baby. In short, they are against people having babies. Some because of overpopulation fears, many others just want humanity to end altogether. Some of them do it for environmental reasons, others, like this guy, believe it's unethical for anyone to have children. Now, this isn't your typical let's not have children or let's just have one to save the planet philosophy. This is something deeper and far more disturbing. Now, I vaguely kind of became aware of this idea a few years ago, but not in any particular detail. And I'm not going to get into the details of how I know this person because there's others surrounding situation that deserve anonymity. This person was clear they were trying to make a name for themselves by being part of this movement, and they were proudly displaying that they had had their children pledged to never have children themselves and thus be the end of the line, and end of the line being a literal quote. At the time, I assumed it was some of this, global overpopulation stuff, so I kind of shrugged it off and didn't think much of it. As I've been getting more interested in natalist stuff, I've been seeing more anti-natalist ideas. Anti. It wasn't really interesting to me, so I wasn't really looking at it and I wasn't getting into the details of it. Then this guy tries to blow up an IVF clinic. And I decide, well, this is a little more serious, so I guess I need to look into this a little bit. In one of the stories that popped up talking about this, they were getting into one of the Reddits that get into this community. And they were pretty much in full defense mode, saying, oh, no, 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 we don't allow people to discuss violence on our site. And then I spotted a weird thing that made me curious. The moderator said, we won't even allow something like the Great World Explorer theory to be discussed, and hinting at it that it was essentially a really mundane, low end item, but they considered even that too controversial. So I tried looking this up and I really didn't get sane results. I said, okay, well, let's run it by old Grok. And Grok gave me a lot of useless, rambling information, as it tends to do when it really doesn't know what you're asking it. And of course, at the end, Grok says, hey, was this helpful? And I'm like, no. And so then it asked me for the context in which I had heard it mentioned. And then I said, well, anti-natalism. And so it's like, oh, well, that's an autocorrect error. It's supposed to be Great World Exploder. So, what is the Great World Exploder? Something that the anti-natalists consider to be very tame, but still something they won't talk about, at least in a forum they don't want to get banned. Well, see, in anti-natalist philosophy, all life is unbearable suffering. And the Great World Exploder is an ethical construct. Their idea is if there were a truly benevolent being or human with unimaginable power, that being, because it's benevolent, would end all life suddenly and painlessly on Earth. Now, the reason for antinatalism is a literal rendering of, I didn't ask to be born. And since life is all unbearable suffering, and those being born can't consent to being born, it's unethical to have children at all. Now, if it were merely that these people wanted to wallow in their own misery, that's certainly their own right. But this incident is an indicator that this movement is creating ticking time bombs out there. Pardon the expression. I'm I'm not going to name the suicide bomber because he deserves to disappear into anonymity. Uh, I am going to talk about his manifesto because it gives us some insight. So apparently, when you wallow in self-pity and decide that the mere act of being alive is insufferable pain, apparently you get depressed and you get suicidal. Go figure. The bomber was friends with a woman who was also in this cult of depression. Sometime recently, the female friend said, well, enough's enough, talked her boyfriend, who's not the bomber, into shooting her in the head one night while she was asleep. And this boyfriend apparently did just that and is now facing second-degree murder charges. At least that's the last thing I read on it. Now, the manifesto itself is rambling, partially incoherent, even maybe more than partially, and very profanity laden. I'm going to present his ideas here. I'm not going to pretend I respect them. So, just for the most part, I am not quoting directly, I'm more paraphrasing. The variation I had was an audio recording. So essentially, rather than try to transcribe it, I grabbed ideas and threw it in there. So I'm not passing off what I'm saying as quotes, it's paraphrasing. Okay, so the bomber says people do not consent to being born. And having a child is exactly the same as having sex with a woman who's passed out from drinking too much. Consent. He refers to people outside his group as life addicts. And he's not interested in being one. He was angry that people tried to invite him to have experiences. He claimed they are like pushers trying to get him addicted to life, like they were. He felt it was stupid to participate in life in any way. Specifically, the people who participated in life showed their stupidity. Their life addiction controlled them. It was not their thoughts that was having them do things. It was just evolution driven. Now, the default condition, according to him, is deprivation. In order to stave off the deprivation low, they chase after these life experiences in order to try to catch the life high. Now, since he and his other group members are aware of this great truth, he and all the people who believe as he does are super intelligent, as opposed to the moronic life experience chaser. And the fact that these other people were around made his every minute of waking life abject misery. So, according to him, if you chase life experience, you're merely a slave to DNA. You're not a thinking, rational being like him because you're unaware of this reality. As an odd aside, he asserted that every mass shooting was preceded by the shooter considering killing themselves. Don't know if this is true or not. Potentially, probably a fair amount. But I don't know. I seem to remember like the Columbine shooters had kind of an escape plan built into their whole thing. So I think he's just projecting here. But tell me if you know otherwise, let me know. So he said, if we created a true right to die, which I'll get into a little bit, he said we probably would end mass shootings. And here's me completely and not him at all. That's kind of an odd concern for somebody who wanted a lifeless planet. Okay, so he continues to say that there is no downside with having a true right to die. Anybody who wanted to die should have no questions asked, and there should be absolutely painless methods available to them. We should not worry about slippery slopes. If people who might have changed their minds choose to die in error, it's no loss since death is totally inevitable. It's the end result no matter what, so it doesn't matter when it happens. His idea on the right to die was that any person, no matter what the circumstance, should be able to have self death on demand. It should be a method that is absolutely pain free in every way. The person choosing death should not have to physically do anything, it should just happen. All current forms of self death, according to him, are lacking because none of these methods are graceful. The method should be graceful. No other person should have the ability to evaluate or approve the person's right to do this. A person should just be able to fall asleep and never wake up again. All current forms of permanent self harm are all, as he says it, are all painful and scary. They aren't graceful. And so that's part of one of the things that made him angry, is that it was too difficult to do things the way he wanted it done. He expressed absolute rage at the workers at the IVF clinic. Whatever happened to them when he was about to do his bombing event, he said they deserved. The fact they were ignorant of his philosophy was no excuse for what they were doing. Apparently, IVF is a hideous crime in the face of the anti-natalist movement. He stated his intent to bomb and destroy the clinic. He called it, this is a quote, an act of warfare against the pro-life and pro-natalist movement. He was very upset about internet censorship. He was angry that many venues prevented him and other people who believed as he did from discussing whatever they wanted to discuss. And now here's purely me again. Looking at what was going on, peeking at the Reddits and all that, there are plenty of places to discuss this idea. All the places merely prohibit speaking of or planning violence. So presumably, he wanted to discuss these violent ideations and couldn't. Going back to his thoughts, the only thing life is capable of doing is harm. He also singled out transhumanists for his anger, with no specifics, but I imagine the idea of trying to make life longer and transcend existence, and consciousness surviving forever, that kind of stuff. And again, it wasn't anything specific. It was just basically profanity laced anger at this. He lumped them in with the IVF clinic people as if they're pretty much the same group. He wanted to point out that he was not seeking attention, but he needed to do this because he cared so deeply. He could not sit back and not act any longer. He said this was an emotional commitment because of how deeply he cared. And he wanted to point out that acting on emotions did not make him irrational. He also stated that all parents are killers because they knowingly bring children into the world, knowing that the children are going to die someday. Parents are responsible for the deaths of all their own children. And he did rant at points about being a pro-mortalist, like mortality, mortal. And the best I can make of it, it's just about more death more quickly. So the more it happens, the more quickly it happens, the better. Meaning that when I say more quickly, like if someone were to live to 80, it'd be better if they only lived to 40, etc. Now, the nuances of how this differs from antinatalism eludes me. And quite frankly, the research for doing this has kind of been draining enough that I don't really want to break down any of this insanity any further. One of the things that kind of struck me is this reminds me a bit of seems like a variant of Gnosticism, whereas Gnostics basically want to transcend the physical and get back to the spiritual, become one with God or become one with the spiritual realm, or however you want to look at your Gnosticism. But this seems to be a nihilistic form of Gnosticism where there's nothing, nothing, and nothing, and the quicker we get back to nothing, the better it is. So, at the very end, the most important thing to understand is the Mad Bomber essentially failed. The only person he killed was himself, and although the IVF clinic was very heavily damaged, no workers were injured, and no embryos were lost. The backup power kicked in, none of the coolers were damaged, so all these potential life forms still have their potential life in front of them. So, why do we really care about this? Well, this is a culture of death that thinks doing good is ending life. Now, I'm not insinuating that all the people following this ethical system are as far gone as this guy was. However, you can see it can really quickly turn into an unhealthy feedback loop. I mean, essentially, it looks like a girl he was pining after who was with another guy decided to check out, and that basically gave him no further reason to continue. Now, since he exists out there as part of this group, one would presume there are more people like him in that group, or at least people who are potentially like him, waiting for an incident that's going to set them off to where they're going to go do something stupid like this. And there's also a possibility we've already seen some of their activity, i.e., various violent events that are going on around the country, and we may not have even realized it was related to this philosophy. It just so happens that this guy made a manifesto in such a way where we know who he is and what he believed. So, in short, the bomber had a small friend group that included a female friend. This ethic system made her so distraught that she instructed her boyfriend to offer one night in her sleep with a gun. Presumably, the boyfriend had to be also a believer and thus was willing to murder her for the good of their ethical belief system. Although the bomber doesn't say it directly, this death by boyfriend event probably caused him to make his decision to perform the bombing. So these little groups are probably all ticking time bomb suicide cults, waiting for the first one to get up their nerve. Again, I don't mean the entire grouping of anti-natalists, but they don't meet as a convention. They probably have teeny little friend groups like this guy did. And essentially, they're probably just waiting for the first one to get up their nerve. Now, when this was all over, the bomber's residence was searched, and they found that he had a great deal of bomb making material. This was in a typical suburban crowded neighborhood. If the bomb he'd been working on had detonated, he would have likely killed a lot of his neighbors. This was a fairly powerful bomb. I also suspect that this philosophy is another anti humanist elite promotion. Ideas like this have been around a while, but this movement has really taken off since the early 2000s due to two books, which I'm not going to cite here because I don't want anyone to read them or buy them. Now, I wouldn't be shocked to find out that some billionaire or some NGO has been pumping money into this idea. Uh, so, to put this in scope, the anti-natalist Reddit group had 232,000 members in it as of December of 2024. So in the comments, have you heard of this before? Do you think it's a big thing? Do you think there's problems coming with this? What do you think of my idea that it could be a essentially some kind of elite promotion? Some more uh, world depopulation stuff. Tell me what you think below.
Happy, happy, joy, joy.